raising excellence, the most valuable hour of your day. Today's show, are we more than dogs in cages? Sometimes we have to wonder. Hey, with my fellow guest host today, or my fellow host today, Agnieszka, our psychosomatic illuminator,
Hi, nice to be here.
Willow, our trauma consultant.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here tonight.
I guess I forgot to introduce myself. I'm the MC. I'm Mike. In any case, um, if you're viewing us live, feel free to, if you got a question or a comment, please throw it out there. We're raising excellence. We're always trying to raise the bar. If you've got a suggestion or something that can help us out, make this thing better, we're all for it. So let us know.
And
In any
welcome to the
case,
viewers who've already joined us and are rejoicing in this drama discussion with dogs and cages. And hi, Tyler.
yeah, man, we've got another part to this three-part series, and or actually six-part series, but today is part three, and man, we've gone through a lot of material, but let's get to Willow. Willow, what do we got for today?
So, hi, everyone, again. I really wanted to thank you for joining us on the third night. Trauma is no easy task to start tackling, so I'm really grateful that everyone's here. The concept that I want to try and explore this evening is learned helplessness. And the reason, sorry, I got a text message. Deirdre said that Mike's audio is a little bit low.
Thank you, Deidre.
No problem. So, learned helplessness is a state that the term was coined by, and I cannot pronounce his name, Martin Siegelman.
Siegelman,
That's
yeah.
close.
That sounds pretty good.
That's as close as I can get. Where he did this horrific experiment, which I've referred to before, of exposing dogs to inescapable shock. And basically, I mean, that's pretty, what's the word?
Extreme.
Clear?
Dangerous.
I was gonna say clear, like inescapable shock, something that some unbearable experience, pain or otherwise detrimental experience that you cannot get away from. And what he found was after these dogs had been exposed to inescapable shock, which I equivocate to unbearable experiences, without the option of getting away or fighting it or doing something to mitigate it, afterwards these dogs would show no interest, willingness, or ability to take opportunities to escape any sort of bad experience. And he coined the term that what this was learned helplessness. Now, I actually just recently found out that I say similar, but it's definitely not similar. Another test was done on humans with an annoying sound. Hi, Dennis.
Our
So
co-host Dennis has joined us. Hey, Dennis.
Hi.
with the humans, they were exposed to a dial that would and a sound, a really annoying, aggravating sound that some people were not exposed to the sound. A second group was exposed to the sound, but they were offered an ability or an option to turn it off or change the situation, in some way to mitigate it. Maybe there was some headphones there or something they could block it out. And the third group was exposed to the sound with no option of getting away from it. And the same results. It was more complicated, but they were basically the same results. The people who were exposed to the sound without the option had essentially learned that they were helpless to do anything in any situation to avoid, and all they could do was basically posture and just try and survive it by not doing anything or hoping that. And this goes into like the fawning and freezing that we talked about yesterday, about like just hoping to get through the situation. But yeah, that's what we wanted to talk about today. So if anyone has anything they'd like to say on that subject.
I would definitely like to chip in on, this is something that we can observe, So here again is something that is out there, available for us to observe, is what is the behavior of the the general masses, and of course what is it being portrayed as in the media as well, because I think to a large degree they've got a pattern behavior before they expect behavior, and then they expect behavior, and they get everybody's expectations to a certain level, and then of course they're um, taking advantage of all this by creating a traumatic event. But I think we can see this pretty clearly, that a lot of people are suffering from this, and certainly this is why this information is so important.
Yeah, so how do we deal with it? How do we know if we're a dog in the cage? And if we decide that we are, what's our way out? What rope can we follow out of it?
Wow, you jumped right to the end of the whole conversation. You're like,
Oh,
how do we fix this? How do we get this
Let's-
done? I'm like, well, that's a really long and messy road. That's
Are
gonna
we
take a
still
lot
in the
more
awareness
effort.
stage?
You're not being
before the
terribly
solution?
encouraging here. They're long and nasty, like
I don't like to encourage um,
trivializing.
unreal expectations, because that is actually I included it further along in the conversation, but this is actually a great time to bring it up. So here are 3 examples of situations that can either lead to learned helplessness or reinforce it. Now, if this leads just to learned helplessness and you're just doing this over and over again, it's a lot easier to change it than if you're reacting to a traumatic situation in the past. But continuing to smoke despite several attempts to quit can cause a person to believe that they will always be a smoker. Similar, being unable to lose weight after making various dietary or lifestyle changes lead you to give up trying because you've learned. And the other one, which is really common in domestic abuse situations, leaving a situation of domestic abuse can be very difficult. Women or men in having this experience tend to leave several times before doing so, and it's usually that's because this person somewhere down the line, or because they have left numerous times and they have realized that they have to go back, or they think they have to go back for whatever reason, they begin to believe they can never escape the abuser. And even when help and support are available, they don't take that option because they don't realize that it is an option. And the last thing I'd like to point out, when Agnieszka had asked, like, what is the way to do this? The most effective tactic that they found was actually physically dragging the dogs out of the cages and releasing them, like showing them physically that they can escape. And that's where I suggest getting into physical self-defense, which that's going into more of not next week, but the week after. We'll pick up where we left off this evening, and we'll talk about more about the specific areas of your life that you can change to try and like mitigate or manage these symptoms until you can get to see someone or get some outside help.
So is it then that it's not technically it's the same action, right? Like it's the same action that is required to stop smoking or to stop, any of the examples that you just laid out. But so it's really just our perception that makes it different, that makes it more different. But the actual thing itself is the same thing, right? It's to stop smoking, it's to stop doing whatever it is. But it's what we perceive. So we perceive it to be more difficult. We perceive it to be more difficult than it actually is. So the actual thing itself is the same thing. It's just stop doing this, stop doing that. But because we have tried so many times, we create we have this perspective now that it's so much more difficult than what it actually in reality is. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I would just throw in here that like I was talking about with patterns, if we take something like a diet, and someone that's overweight and they feel like they can't they're just going to be a fat person, and I can tell you, I struggled with this for about 10 years, where I didn't realize like how my diet affected myself. and I was just consuming way too much sugar, and but I didn't know that, because I was eating like bread and stuff like that. And of course I was drinking soda, but then I didn't really count how many sodas I was drinking a day and stuff like that, so I never really paid attention to that. But then that's how I got into this thing where I'm like, man, I'm exercising and stuff, but man, I just be getting fatter and fatter, what's going on. But it took me like 10 years to figure that out. So I mean, but this is the thing, is that if you got a pattern like that and you start to like think of yourself in a way in which you don't have willpower, uh, that can be a pattern for a lot of other things that that you're trying to uh, experience in your life.
So I'd like to point out, since you were talking about patterns, and to answer Agnieszka's previous question, yes, that's basically what I was saying. Um, One of the patterns of learned helplessness is that, well, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD, also known as complex trauma disorder, is a psychological disorder that can develop in response to prolonged, repeated experience of interpersonal trauma, and in a context in which the individual has little or no chance to escape. So, complex or CPTSD is the repeated pattern of going through this trauma response and posturing and then shutting down, and then the threat kind of leaves, or you don't really go back to equilibrium, but you go back to maybe flight, where you're like on guard, but you don't ever actually go back to a normal. And that becomes such a pattern for people that they can't change. That is their routine, and they can't even see it, because it's like, this is just what it is to be alive. This is just what it is to be me.
But how does that work when a specific event happens to one person? They may have no negative experience, like no negative fallout for it. And then the same thing happens to another person and they're traumatized. And sometimes the things that happen, like even for me, right? Sometimes big things happen and I'm not traumatized, and little things happen and I'm traumatized. So it doesn't even have to seem to make sense in one person's lifetime, let alone across the population.
Yeah. And there's also the difference between PTSD and CPTSD. So a lot of one-time events, say you are mugged on the street, or you had a sexual assault, uh, any sort of like a car accident, um, you can often have PTSD from that. Your brain and your body react to a traumatic event, and then it takes a while for it to go back to equilibrium. Um, but I think when you get people who are reactive to little things all the time, it's more of an indication of complex
But
post-traumatic stress.
actually, what I was asking more is like, if some people can have this experience and not have a negative effect, and other people, like, what are those people who don't have the negative effect? What are they doing differently, and how can we maybe emulate or learn from what they're doing differently, and then not fall into the same trap, right? Because I believe that it's the amygdala hijack that creates the trauma when it's repeatedly in the amygdala, when your thoughts are stuck in the amygdala and they're not coming to the frontal lobe. I think prolonged exposure to that, or prolonged time when you're in that flight or fight response, it releases all sorts of endorphins and hormones and this and that, and things happen in your body that kind of get you stuck in that mode. So what would be the best way to unstick yourself? Because I don't want to be talking about trauma and tell people, yeah, that's trauma and that's worse trauma. Let's tell them about how to elevate yourself out of that trauma.
I would say, so it was actually really interesting that the same guy who coined the term learned helplessness also wrote a book called Learned Optimism. And it's the opposite. And he basically took all of his information and flipped it around to try and get you to be optimistic. And it's actually a little bit harder, supposedly, from what I had read.
What's Pete Walker's book? Is survival to
Thriving or
thrival,
thrival, yeah,
thriving?
something like that.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Surviving and
surviving to
thriving.
thriving.
And even in The Body Keeps the Score, it talks about how one of the most my mind is kind of blanking on the word, important factors of whether you can deal with it and like whether you're going to be stable enough to learn to like get better is if you can imagine a way to escape. That's kind of the key for learned helplessness is none of these animals, none of these I say animals and humans as if they're different, but it's because I don't know how to differentiate between that animal kingdom and the level of animal that we are, because we are much more complex. Um, the key factor was inescapable shock. Like you have this unbearable experience, you can't escape it. You can't do anything about it. And when the brain says when you're in the situation you can't do anything about it, you're not going to waste your energy. It's stupid to. It it's not going to be effective and it probably would be more harmful. But unless you can imagine a way out of it, like after the fact, you have to catch someone when they are not when they are regulated, not when they're dysregulated. Because when they're dysregulated, they can't take in any of this information.
What I keep on hearing is, to me, it comes back down to perception, like the ability to perceive the situation, differently. Like, do I have the ability to step out of the frame of that current situation, whichever one it be, or am I stuck in seeing it from that only way? It's like, am I seeing it only, okay, I've tried so many times and I failed, and and you're just stuck there, or do I have the ability to perceive it from a different angle and to step out and to not be overwhelmed by that immediate situation? And that's what I keep on hearing. Like for me, it's like, oh, it's perception. It's like, can I see it from a different angle? Can I step out of it and see it from a different angle, or am I stuck in that situation?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, you basically described one of my IFS sessions with a client where she had described a sheet of metal laying on her. And I said, okay, if you can't move it, if you can't get out from underneath it, have you looked at it? What does it look like? And then that opened a whole different can of worms for like what it actually was.
uh, Something that Agnieszka was saying, in regard to what you can do. I mean, there is definitely some things that can help, and this is why I kind of advocate for journaling. And this is kind of one of the suggestions that came from what's the lady's name that we were talking about yesterday?
Julia Cameron? No, the artist's
No,
way.
the bad childhood
I don't actually
fairy or
know her
whatever.
name. Yeah, the crappy childhood fairy is her
Yeah,
name on YouTube. She's excellent.
but she has like a little thing where she says every day she encourages her people to do like a fear assessment or a kind of a feeling assessment, and like every day, just sometime during the day, pull up a piece of paper and just write down, like, what am I afraid of? What is my state of mind? Am I doing okay? Or is there, are the things going wrong? And just by writing those things down, you really kind of get into a mode of kind of setting priorities and understanding what is real and what isn't, and start to identify, you know, where you might have fallen into a trap. But I think it's a good thing. She says she does it twice a day. And so for some people it's a way to kind of organize your thoughts and keep the anxiety down too. So it's also good in that respect.
And it kind of forces you to step into, like, oh, like, who is thinking those thoughts, like who is, what's actually going on. So it actually forces you, or it motivates you to change the perception again, to not be stuck in this situation, but to say, oh, actually, I'm writing it down. Who's writing it down? Oh, if there's somebody writing it down, then that's already looking at what's being said. And if you're looking at what's being said and at who is saying it, then you're already like taking out yourself at least partially out of the situation, then, and that allows you again to look at it, from the outside, and not be like completely stuck into it, so to say.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that you brought that up because that's a sneak peek at not next Monday, but the week after that will be mindful routines and journaling. That is specifically the daily negativity dump is what I call it. I think she calls it a variation of a daily practice or something.
Self-assessment, I think, is what she said. She called it, but
But
maybe in that video.
it's an excellent way of if anyone remembers the image that we had last week, not the colored one, but the one that had trauma in the middle and then had the spikes
I
out
can
with all the
show it.
different. Yeah, that'd
I
be
can show
wonderful.
it. No, that's not it.
That's
Wait,
that's
wait, wait.
actually what I
No,
end
that's
up
not it.
doing
Oh,
for
there it
the
is.
what's it called? The daily negativity dump. A lot of times I'll wake up in the morning and I will write, I have a fear, or and then it'll be like something about intrusive thoughts, and then yeah, not that one. There it is. Not that one either. Yeah, sorry, I was just looking at the stream. I was like, wow, no, that's not it either. But yeah, I'll
You got a
note
delay going, so
that.
while you were saying that, it's already been gone off the screen.
Actually, now that I'm looking at it, almost every single one of those have been included in one of my daily negativity dumps because I will wake up feeling dysregulated. And it's not until I get all of that out onto a piece of paper to where it's in its place and I don't have to worry about putting it in its place in my mind or remembering it or, doing all this stuff. It's not my, it's already done. It's in its inbox, basically. Um, then I start to feel, which if you would like to put on the one with the different layers, the trauma response.
If I can do this, like so. No, that's not it. There we go.
So the top two layers, I'll end up writing symptoms of those. And then once I'm done, I will eventually go back to the green level, which is that's not that one. Not that one either.
Stop saying things from 2 minutes ago. Jesus.
I appreciate you handling it at least because I would have messed it up even worse. But yeah, you'll go back into like the social engagement, and in IFS it's like the 8 C's, and they're like compassion, curiosity, connectiveness, a couple of them that I'm gonna start repeating if I try to remember them all. And then from there, I was actually able to say, okay, I spend this much, and I start making pie charts of how much of my day do I spend dysregulated. And that's my routine. Like that's why this whole week is not about here's some solutions on how to fix it, because everyone wants to jump to the end of the road. They want to be done with it because this is messy. And the only way to do it is to actually identify what you are doing right now, today, because that matters more than it matters more than anything that you can include into your life. You have to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
I think it's very. But sorry, go ahead, Mike.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Because you said negatively, looking at it negatively, the negative dump. So in my mind, it's also to, a great question to ask yourself is, since we're kind of mentally labeling situations, why not label it the other way? Why not label it positive? Why not say, oh, what's actually great about this? Because that's like kind of mind-boggling. It's like, okay, I'm trying to lose weight and I can't get it done and I keep on failing and losing weight, and what's going on? Like, what's the great thing about it? What's actually positive about that? And it's like, oh, what does this situation actually point at? What is fantastic about it? And it's like, first, like, positive. Nothing is positive about me being overweight, and so, but and then if you keep on looking at it from that angle, it's like, oh, yeah, but actually, it's actually, if I had to point out something positive, and you make up your own thing, but it's like, oh, maybe it's like I continuously, like, life is pointing at the fact that I'm not really aware of what I'm eating, or that I'm not aware of what I'm putting in my body, and whether that's good or bad. So if you focus on that, you'll be you'll be amazed, like, how many positive things you actually can get out of the situation. And since it's all labeling, we might as well label it positive. So why not do that? We already by default, are putting ourselves down. Oh, it's negative, it's bad. Oh, I can't stop smoking, I can't stop eating, the crap, I can't stop this. But like, what's actually positive about it? Because, I feel if we are put in a certain situation repeatedly and we cannot overcome it, then there must be some kind of lesson in it. And if we keep on repeating it, that just means we have not, gotten the lesson. We have not learned the lesson that we're supposed to learn. So why not look at it from that point and see what's actually great about that, and say, I'm being reminded continuously about, that I'm not really aware, that I'm not really maybe, in my body, or maybe in my emotions in that moment, and like that I'm not really feeling out what is that specific food or what is that behavior actually doing to myself on a physical level, on an emotional level, on an intellectual level. Like, how is that impacting myself? So it forces me to really be here in the moment, and to really feel out like what's going on right now, and to not be numb, and not to be oblivious to what I'm actually doing on several levels. So then you can turn it around, and you can actually continuously look for the positive and for the good, and where it's actually leading you. And then that might also be, like a starting point on how to shift the awareness, and how to shift your perception of that specific situation. And then if you're able to not see it as something negative and something bad, then that, maybe that in itself can already transform, the situation for you in that moment.
What you just said there, Dennis, is essentially what I got from the book Punished by Rewards. Essentially the suggestion that it had after it logically deduced that both punishment and rewards are bad for people is that what you really need to do is find what's good in everything you need to do, so that like everything you do, your entire life is just, you're always, looking to the good things about, I can't wait to wash the clothes, kind of thing, because I'm looking forward to the good things that brings me, you know.
What's great about washing these dishes right now?
Yeah, there's
I
all
have
kinds of good stuff. Believe me, I have
Yeah,
learned that.
yeah.
I have found a different kind of I guess intimacy is the right word. It sounds off. It sounds like it should, like I don't know, but it kind of feels right. Where instead of saying, "Man, I don't want to do the laundry," but then being like, "Oh, I'm so excited to do the laundry," I can be like, I don't really want to do the laundry. Why don't I want to do the laundry? It gives me a moment to get like it's almost really special because I get a special moment with that part of myself that doesn't really want to say that around anyone else, but I get to listen to it and say, I hear you. I hear you don't want to climb down what I call the murder stairs in my house because they're really steep, really steep. Be like, oh, okay, that's why I don't, because I don't feel safe carrying a bag of laundry, and I also don't like the physical exhaustion of carrying it down properly so that I don't get injured, and so a lot of times I'll end up avoiding doing it, but that's not fair. I spend a lot of time at the house. I use most of the laundry because I have most of the laundry. I own most of it in the house. Uh, so like it was a moment where I didn't have to be fake. I didn't have to like force myself to want to do something or look for the silver lining because I get like I understand being positive about your life, but sometimes your life is not positive. And being positive about it means you have to be realistic because if you're
But
just
you
fake
can
positive,
always make positive something. One time my life was so bad that the only thing good about my life was my coffee. Because I knew that when I make my coffee, I can make it from whatever ingredients I want. I can put whatever I want in it. And that was the only thing in my life that I felt I had total control over it. But that coffee got me out of there step by step by step. Every single day, I was rejoicing in that coffee. I was like over focusing. I would stare at my coffee the whole bus ride to crappy job with a crappy home situation that there was no escape from. But the only thing I had was my coffee. And that's a lead, You have to find a lead out somewhere.
And you will
absolutely.
know, but you will know, like, if you if you're lying to yourself, like that won't work. If if you really are, oh, it's so great to wash dishes right now, but really inside you're like, oh, this is crap, this is shit, I don't want to do it. Like that doesn't work out, because that's
No.
like that's a conflict. But I feel it's a difference if you look for the good. So you're not saying it is good, you're just saying, oh, what is great about that? And it's like you're already looking at that. It's like, if you type in the search engine what you're looking for, and then you must find something in that field, what is great about dishwashing. And if you would looking for what is crappy about dishwashing, you're also going to find something. You're going to find the answer to that question. But it's kind of like the quality of the question that will determine also the answer that you get. And so it's to overcome the fact that you're not doing the whole, making it sound positive, although inside you feel that it's not positive at all, but you're looking for something positive in it, and you're not saying it's there, you're just looking for it, and then you just see what answer is coming. Sometimes it's not it's not about getting the answer to the question that you're asking, but sometimes it's actually in the asking itself, even if you can't get the answer for the question, but just to ask the question itself, that process itself is what makes the shift.
If I could stamp like hearts and likes on that, I would be right now, because you clarified exactly what I was trying to say.
Also, then this is a kind of a thing in the problem solving area is like, what is like, if it is something like, man, I just don't like it because I got to walk down these, very steep, dangerous steps. Well, if there's a way that you could actually, so like if it said, oh, well, if I could magically make those steps go away, would it be much more pleasant? And you go, hell yeah, it would. And they say, oh, well, we actually can install like a closet washing machine in the upstairs or something like that, or you could do a laundry chute, some kind of way that you can solve the biggest part of the problem. And then it's like, okay, I've done that a lot of times with when I was doing construction, where people are bitching about their job or bitching about somebody else's job and how it reflects on theirs, or all these kind of things. And I'd say, well, what is the biggest problem? And then I'd say, well, if I can get that solved, will you will you knock it out? Hell yeah, I would. There you go. And
Actually,
that's how we make our lives better.
You kind of just blew my mind a little bit, because I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what we do in IFS when you're encountering an exile, or even just a part who's protective or being a manager. And you ask them, are you happy with your job, with what you're doing now? And a lot of them will say, well, no, but who else is going to do it? And you say, if it were possible to do a different job, would you be interested? And usually the answer you'll get is something like, well, yeah, but I can't, so there's no point in dealing with that right now. It's like, okay, you don't even have to believe, but if that were possible, would that be interesting to you? And that gets them in the mindset of thinking, what if this positive thing could happen? What if?
Yes.
And not what if I do something and it's a really negative, because that actually will tie in with our fallacy of the week today. Before I move on to going over a couple of the learned helplessness symptoms in children and adults, was there anything else that we wanted to talk about on why, or what is learned helplessness and why does it happen? Were there any other questions about that?
I'm pretty happy where we're at.
Cool.
I think we've really hit on something here. So
I found it interesting that learned helplessness manifests different in children versus adults. In adults, learned helplessness presents as a person not using or learning adaptive responses to difficult situations. So that's usually what you see. And the common manifestations of this are intense feelings of shame, shutting down, feeling trapped, preparation or expectation of death, low self-esteem, poor or lack of, like, no motivation, lack of effort, frustration, and as we all know, frustration always precedes aggression, procrastination, and feelings of hopelessness. So if you're feeling some of these things on a constant basis and you find yourself not using techniques or adaptive responses to get out of situations, you just find yourself, I can't do this, you might be struggling with some traumatic experiences, and maybe you should reach out for help. Let's see. So there are 7 different domains of symptoms and behavioral characteristics, and I won't go into details about all of like what all they mean. I'll just touch on what areas in children learned helplessness affects. So it affects their attachments, their biology, their affect and emotional regulation, and affect as in like their agency, their ability to affect their environment and to get responses, disassociation or amnesia, behavioral control, impulse control issues, cognition, and your self-concept. And in adults it's similar, but it's changes in most of those situations. So it'll be like changes in your emotional regulation, variations, changes in your cognitive functioning, like getting amnesia or disassociation all of a sudden, changes in your self-perception, changes in your perception of perpetrators, and alterations in relations with others, and changes in systems of meaning, so sustaining loss of faith and other situations like that. That's kind of scary how often we see that in our peers, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, as a matter of fact, when you were saying that, I was thinking, wow, this is essentially how we lose trust within our society, is by essentially creating these circumstances where people don't know how to express themselves and feel kind of paranoid of, of what's they're experiencing, to the point that they don't know who to talk to, or they don't even know if they can perceive reality to be reality. You know, they don't trust themselves.
And they can't, because their body is telling them that they're under constant threat when really they're not. So like in reality, who are you supposed to trust? Yourself, who's giving you mixed signals, or everyone else who doesn't know what's going on with you? It's a really
Yeah.
isolating feeling. And until you have a word for it, you can't describe it to other people. And the only people who know what you feel like are people who are dealing with the same stuff as you, and they're probably not dealing with it any better than you are. So you're
Right.
basically trauma bonding to get some sort of validation.
Whereas even if you grow up in a situation of constant scarcity of some kind, and for some people it might be a reality, so to say, and for some people it might be just perceived. And for some people it is like, if you look at poverty, so that's something we would say, oh, that's a real thing, or he doesn't have food, or he doesn't have this and that. And for some people it's like more an emotional thing, that they perceive. I think of small children, for example, like sometimes there will be behaviors, or they will perceive a situation from in a way that you don't even realize in a moment as an adult, that that's really, but for him or for her, like, it's really traumatic, and they didn't understand it the way you do. And then if we cannot follow that, then for us, like, their behavior or their acting out becomes, we can't really conceive why they're acting out or why they're throwing a tantrum right now, but it's because they perceived, like, the situation is really traumatic in that moment. And then if I even look further, then it's like, what if it even goes beyond the experiences that we would have in this life right here. What if you come into this life already with baggage, or with some kind of baggage that we're bringing in from from previous experiences, and that we have to deal with. So that is also something interesting to take into consideration, and which seems interesting to look at, because if you look at younger children, for example, like, it's difficult to understand, or why are some acting this way, and some some people seemingly come into this life with more baggage, or with more how would you say, an emotional load, so to say, and others come into this world being kind of relaxed and kind of calm. So it's interesting to look at it even beyond the experience of this lifetime, I feel.
And even the experience of poverty is not really standard, because I remember feeling like when I was 13, I remember feeling like I was living in poverty, and I was never hungry, and I was never thirsty, and I never lacked love. But I lacked those jeans, the whitewash ones that just came out of that year. And my mom said she wouldn't spend that much money on a pair of jeans because they were super trendy and super expensive.
So it's something that's created, through the media, then, that
there's
you're
a
led
cultural
to.
experience of negativity.
Absolutely.
Right.
I had a similar experience. I grew up So my biological father was pretty decently well off. He helped a couple of my step siblings get a house, um, and their cars and stuff like that. So I think they were well on their way to owning their home when I was young. So they were pretty well off. My mother, on the other hand, I lived with her. We lived paycheck to paycheck. And I never thought that I was poor. I'd had people tell me, oh, yeah, you're poor. You live in the country. You slaughter your animals for food. And I'm like, yeah, I'm weird. I'm cool. I love it. I get to go out and hang out in the creek all day while you have to sit in your house being told what to do all the time. But there was one day where it was my responsibility. Well, it was my responsibility. At the time, I thought it was my like privilege. I was just so excited because I would get to get the mail and I get to take it up to when I got off the bus from school, I get the mail and I could take it to my mom. And I just was so proud of it. Well, one day I took my mail to my mom, and I hope she doesn't get upset for me telling this story because I think we've all kind of been there.
Uh-oh.
But
Pay attention.
So I handed her the mail, and she was like, that's all there is. There was no more. And I was like, no, there was no more. And for like a week she was so upset, and she was like kind of lashing out because I don't think she realized, she was just upset, and it made me upset. I was like, I don't understand. And come to find out, she was waiting on a child support check that I had dropped in the yard on my way to get the mail. And so for a week and a half she had been calling like people demanding this money because she was expecting it and it was part of her budget. And then when she realized my older sister found it in the yard and brought it to her, and she realized that I had dropped it, and she unloaded on me. I was like, what? I was like, it was the mail. I don't understand. Are we so broke that you can't handle, like, I didn't understand concept of money. I don't even know how much it was for child support. But like that realization, I was like, holy crap, my mom will like, in my mind, I was like, she'll hate me if I lose this money for her. Like, if I was not allowed to touch the mail after that. Like, I thought that I had severely messed up. And, as an adult, I realized that I not subconsciously, I accidentally, because I was a child, threatened the income going into her house and to feed her, all of her children, including me. And now as an adult, I'm like, okay, I get the anger. But as a child, I had never felt poor until that moment. I was like, holy crap, I'm getting screamed at because I made a mistake. And that one mistake can threaten my entire livelihood, like my mom's livelihood, and then therefore my livelihood. It just scared me for a while. I was really ashamed. Like, I thought that I had let my family down. But luckily, my stepdad and my mom, which actually was ironic because my mom was furious, and usually she was the one who's like, honey, calm down. Don't scream too much. Don't scare the children. And my stepdad stepped in, and he was like, it's not her responsibility to make sure that you get your child support check. She doesn't get the mail anymore because this isn't happening again. And I had a lot of support, and eventually my mom was like, hey, it's not your fault. I was just really upset. So it all worked out. But little things like that can be so traumatic as a child, especially the when you don't communicate.
When you don't know how.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of extenuating circumstances that can create all kinds of a personal assessment that is traumatic, essentially. Where you can just go to overload, where maybe the bus you're on crashes or something like that, and then you get off, and your shoestrings are lost or something, or they break, and then all of a sudden you're just like, oh God, the world is against me. But at the wrong moment, like if you have that kind of confirmation bias, and then it's proven to you where something else goes wrong, it can really be detrimental to your long-term outlook and your ability to have willpower.
And it comes from labeling, right? Because we're continuously labeling labeling those situations. Oh, it's so bad, I missed the bus. Oh, it's so bad because my shoes are open. And then the other thing is, I guess, that we touched upon earlier, is like, well, if you see everything as bad and as negative, you might as well try to see it as positive. Oh, it's so. What would what would it sound like if you had to say, oh, it's so great that you missed the bus. Oh, because now you can relax and you don't have to run again because you're late anyway. Oh, what's so great about your shoelace? Because
That sounds like
you
me
went
when I
into
missed the bus. Oh, I guess
you
I'm half an hour late. Oh well.
I'd like
your
to
shoelace.
point out also there are two different kinds of learned helplessness. I just found this out today. There is universal learned helplessness, and this is the example was a mother who has a child who has cancer, terminal cancer, or a terminal illness, and nobody in the world is able to do anything. Not just her, but no one. Like no one can change the situation. And that does not nearly often lead to depression or mental illness as the other one, which is personal self-help, yeah, learned
Learned helplessness.
helplessness. Yeah. And that's where, like, if something were to happen to, for example, because I'm going with the, your child, you didn't do something that someone else could have or would have. And that often leads to like much more severe depression and mental illness than the universal. However, the universal just perpetuates the helpless mentality.
Yeah, well, just as a example, there's like 1 million car accidents in the United States every year.
Not this
You
year.
know, well, maybe we've maybe saved a lot of people that way, but
There's something
that's
good
a
in that.
traumatic experience, especially for somebody that like they made the mistake, and that's what caused the accident. And certainly, if they hurt somebody or killed somebody, that's super traumatic. And it could be just you spilled your coffee, or whatever kind of silly circumstance that led to another mistake that could lead to somebody's death.
I'd
And
like
it happens regularly,
That's
very regularly.
literally why I didn't drive till I was 40. That reason alone. Cuz I was like, am I really responsible enough to take other people's lives into my hands like that? Like what if I don't pay attention? I always thought a car is like a ton worth of metal that could squish people.
And it brings
Yeah.
up the concept of guilt, like to my mind, which is something that I kind of eliminated from like a good couple of years back from my vocabulary and also from my way of thinking, because to be responsible, yeah, that's great, like I can see that, but to have uh, it's you're guilty of doing this and that, like I don't think that's something I really would like to even think of again, because really and truly, I look at it as everybody is acting the way he or she is acting, because they're doing the best of their abilities in that moment, and it might look really crappy to you or to me, but they're just doing what they're doing. That's their nature, and that's where they are in life, and that's it. But to keep on writing on, oh, you're guilty of doing this, it's your fault, and it's like that's not taking a perspective that will bring you beyond whatever happened. So I feel it comes back again to accepting what is, to you accept what is, whether you label it as A or as B, that doesn't really matter. In the first place, it is what it is. And then it depends on how you posture yourself, how you perceive it, and then what you do with that situation. And labeling it might not even be so helpful right now, but it's to say, okay, he or she acted the way they did because that's just where they were at that point of their life. Yeah, I don't have to say, oh, you were a bad mother or you were a bad this and that. It's like, no, they acted the way they did, and poof, and that's it. Accept what was, and then what do you do with that situation? How do you move on from there?
Well, that's also being humble and being forgiving. As a community, that's one of the things that we definitely need to bring about, is the understanding of how important it is to be forgiving and be humble, because it's kind of the realization that there is the possibility of mistakes to happen,
Yeah.
that can lead to trauma, that like we can create trauma in other people accidentally. We didn't think we were doing it. Like, your mother is basically focused on something else, and you just happen to, like, trigger the explosion, and you felt like she was, mad at you, but the reality is that she was really kind of mad at herself because she's in this situation. And needless to say, you know, that's where like instilling a forgiveness on a regular basis and a kind of a comfort level for our community, which is much more forgiving and understanding, is a way that we can also kind of open up that box for people to be like, oh, thank you for being forgiving, you know,
The
and
picture I'm
being
getting
understanding.
sorry. The picture I'm getting when I listen to you is waves. So are we, with the action that we're taking, are we creating more waves and more turmoil, or are we like, like smoothing it out and like, okay, there's waves going on, okay, but are we gonna add to it, or are we gonna make it more rough, make the sea more rough and the waves higher, or are we gonna like, just like you said, with forgiveness, with humility, it's like, it's like smoothing and it's like bringing some calm into the situation. And yeah, I think it's wavy enough out there, so it's great if you have that ability to bring calm into whatever's going on there. And I think that's something also people will perceive then in you, and will seek you out for that, and will, because that's what we really look for, I guess, to calm those waves in our lives, and to not to be shaken up by them, because waves are there and they're necessary and they have their function as well. But it's it's a how would you say, a nicer passage, or a nicer voyage, if you if the sea is calm, so to say, for you.
Yeah, and I think it's attractive too because it's kind of like safe haven, so like if we're the safe haven for other people to like be able to, be trusting, express themselves, get relief from, um, those are advantages that we can get this, bigger message out that I think is also important.
See, I was actually just gonna wrap it up, but you drew another thought out of my mind. I've never liked the idea of being a safe place, although I understand and I appreciate its usefulness. I've always liked the terminology a torchbearer. One, you will always remember the person who handed you the torch in the dark. You can't forget that person. I love that. I love being, knowing that I will be remembered by people for helping and giving them something. But we're still out in the middle of the jungle. You're safer. You have someone to depend on, but you're not safe. Like, you still have work to do. We still have to go down this path, but now you have a tool to light your way. Like it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I don't like to set out expectations like it's not necessarily safe, because yes, we can have a session, we can talk about something, and you can make a breakthrough, and the next day you're falling apart and you don't know why, and you have to go back because you're not there yet. And that, when people think, I had an epiphany and I'm going to be at the end of the road, they get really disheartened. And it's a really heartbreaking moment to realize that you're not there yet, and no matter how much you've struggled, you're still not there yet. It can be really, it's a really tough thing.
Yeah, well, there again is understanding, is the more that we have understanding about how difficult this is for people. And really, we all have to go through it. But in a lot of cases, the reason that people are intolerant of it is because they don't want to be reminded that they've got to go through it too. And that's kind of the thing that probably is hindering not only their development, but our development when we're the one that are suffering.
Maybe
So it
Absolutely.
is.
maybe the crux is that in finding out that you're that while you are in your I'm not there yetness, you are actually there, because that situation is perpetuating always. There are always going to be waves, but to find out that, while you're struggling with the waves that continuously are coming in, to find your own safe haven and to be safe in yourself, by yourself, recognizing and realizing that those things are coming in, that sometimes you're going to drop the torch, But after that you're gonna bend down and pick it up, and sometimes there's somebody to help you, sometimes it's yourself, but to be there and to be at home, so to say, while going through the waves and while going through the periods that are really dark and some have some light, but to realize that you're actually there at the same time, and to not being stuck in having to depend on the torch being always up there or the waves being always smooth, which is that's not reality. It's never happened. It happens in our life. There's always like ups and downs, but to find balance and harmony in that fact that it's always going to be up and down, maybe that is really where we want to reach all the while. So we're looking for it somewhere, way on the end of the tunnel, or way back there, but actually, and then we're missing the whole point. It's looking for the pencil, and then suddenly realizing that it's actually behind our ear. It was there all the while.
Yep. All right, so we'll move on to the fallacy of the week. And I picked this fallacy because I think it is probably the most commonly used one for anyone who has suffered through a traumatic experience, especially repeatedly, because so the fallacy is argument from consequences. And the reason I picked it is because when you have to weigh the consequences in an abusive situation, it's a different pros and cons list than you would just it's a different way you would argue than if you were actually just living and doing your thing and not surviving but thriving. You'd argue with yourself a little bit differently. You wouldn't argue from how bad are the consequences of this decision, and that will make or break the decision. Do we have an image for that?
I'm just looking at, I don't remember you ever sending me what the fallacy of the week was. I'm like, why didn't I get the image? Did you send me the image?
I did not send you the image because I just looked up the book. It's actually the first one in the book.
But you didn't tell me what the fallacy was either.
No, I wrote it into the spreadsheet. I thought.
Imagine it.
Imagine it.
What is this picture?
Well, describe the picture. There's a little rabbit. No, I don't know what it is.
Just say, let me look up.
No, you have to look it up.
I was actually.
This might be a great way to do it, man. This we might learn something today.
Book of bad arguments, right?
Maybe we should skip the fallacy. We'll have 2 next week.
I was really excited about this, though.
Oh.
I picked it out specifically.
No, you didn't.
I did. I had it picked out. I even wrote it into the spreadsheet.
What happened to your psychic abilities, Agnieszka?
Supposed to be able to read people's faces. What?
Yeah, just look at her face, no?
I didn't even think, because normally what happens is Deirdre sends me the photo during sometime a couple days before or during the week, right? And then I set it up. And this time I didn't even think of it. There was no photo, so I wasn't triggered to do it.
Yeah, and I didn't think of it either. I was like, I put it into the spreadsheet.
All right. Well, I think that if you haven't found it as yet, then we should just skip it for today. You can present this fallacy next week on Monday, and then I'll present another one on Thursday. We'll be good. We can have 2 next week. It's all good. It's all good.
We'll make it work.
We'll make it work. So instead of the fallacy this week, what are we doing? Are we going to have a song and dance? No?
Well, I hope I didn't go on camera for that.
The youngest member is not amused.
Well, we can talk a little bit.
Up now.
Well, we can talk a little bit about. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mike.
No, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Keep walking over you. We could get Agnieszka to talk a little bit about her plan for next week. As a matter of fact.
Oh yes, this illustrious plan.
Versus fear. Love
versus fear, and what do you choose, and how you choose it, and why you choose it, and what are your choices at any given moment of any given time. It's going to be a whole week of love versus fear, and I'm really looking forward to it because I've taught this topic in the past, and yeah, it'll be fun. I promise. Awesome. It'll be better than death, better than writing your own eulogy. Maybe not better, but more, no, I don't know. It was uplifting. I can't even say it was more uplifting because the death thing was uplifting. Well, it'll be fun anyway. It won't be better. It'll be fun. I was just thinking how death is our most unpopular topic. So it'll be better than the most unpopular thing.
Hey, I just want to keep it real, man. We gotta.
That's what we do. We keep it real here.
Let our audience know we're going to keep it real. Amen.
We don't mess around, that's for sure.
That's mostly because I don't have the energy to put into being fake.
Doing it live, all my life. All right, so I think that's going to. The listener, there was a comment. So there was a quote from Rumi that someone shared with us. Imran shared with us. Give up to grace. The ocean takes care of each wave till it gets to the shore. You need more help now than you know. So if you give up to the ocean will take care of you.
Well, I like that it comments, it emphasizes it takes care of each wave on its way to the shore. So it's like you are where you are, and that's okay. You are where you're supposed to be, and you have to have faith. Like some people will be like, "Oh, the universe has got me," or "God's got me. Someone's got my back." Having that faith that something can work out for you is really powerful.
And you're gonna reach the shore, right? Like every wave.
And then you're gonna reach the shore.
And for Rod, we're going to be talking about how to avoid seeming like you don't care next week with love versus fear. That's a perfect question for next week. So he asked, with taking things as they are, how do you avoid acting or seeming like you don't care? We'll answer that Monday or Wednesday.
Wonderful.
So
now we do have a website. It's raisingexcellence.live. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube. We're on Twitter. People can find us there. And we show up live 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, 7:30 Eastern time. So thanks, everybody. Thank you for your time and attention. We hope this was very helpful and productive for you. And certainly we, if we can make it better, let's do it together.
Raising excellence. With that.
We're here to pass the torch.
That's right. Oh, Kelly liked this show. That's cool. Anyway, I'm playing the outro now. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Where's the bongo drums?
Again.